Happy politics and welcome to your favorite political podcast in BC. Well, at least it's mine and it should be yours. This is BC Poly Hotstove. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by
Jordan Bateman, Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the mighty ICBA. I'm fresh after a long weekend, so I'm ready to go.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of mighty and speaking of your long weekend, we were going to talk about something else first, but I have to. If you don't follow Jordan on Twitter or Instagram, my God, you are the maestro of the backyard rink.
It's a weird thing. So growing up in the Lower Mainland, never had a backyard rink. I'm going to let you in a secret, Maclean. I can't even skate. But I like always wanted one. I always wanted that Walter Gretzky moment, right? Little Wayne out there in the backyard, Walter flooding the ice, all that good stuff. My son is a rep hockey player in Langley, 10 years old. So last year was the first year I built him a rink. It lasted precisely 24 hours before the weather deteriorated. So this year, again, did it, and we actually got 3 full days of use out of it over a long weekend. He had a Pro D day on Friday. He skated and loved it. And it's just a weird thing that I try to do, and usually you get maybe 1 week a year here in the Lower Mainland where it's cold enough to do it. So you got to be ready to go, and this year it paid off.
It's beautiful. It's lit nicely. I'm trying to think the last time I actually strapped on skates. I can skate. I used to play hockey, but I mean, it's been years. And so I was feeling a little envy, which I'm not proud to say, over the weekend, looking at your Instagram feed.
Well, you should have a press gallery hockey team, obviously. So get on that. I would like you to play center or right wing, just as a personal thing.
Yes,
but we'll let Shannon Waters play left wing. But nonetheless, it's like really obscure political commentary here.
Shannon would make an excellent defense person. I think she'd toughen the corners and
elbows up. Yeah. Gordie Howe.
That's not a burn if you're listening, Shannon. I think you'd be really good.
Yeah. No, you're right. No, the rink was great, and just added like a little extra thing. But man, it takes a lot of brain space. It's good. In the pandemic, I found that, we're home so much. Having one hobby isn't enough. You got to kind of go through these phases. Like everyone did the baking thing, and there's been different. Everyone did the declutter thing. This was my hobby for the past 2 weeks or so, and it worked. It entertained me for 2 weeks and got me 2 weeks closer to my vaccination.
Speaking of phases, that'll bring us to our first actual political topic of the week. This subject has gone through many phases of debate in this province, and it's entering a new one. I'm talking, of course, of Site C, the mega project, clean energy project up in the Peace Country that was started by the BC Liberals and is being continued by the NDP. It's been beset by a host of geotechnical issues, and among other things, and also the pandemic. And the NDP Commission report to look at it didn't really provide a lot of illumination. And so now the Greens, who have opposed it from the start, are only too happy to host town halls and really try and drive a wedge there. Rob Shaw wrote a brilliant piece on this over the weekend for The Orca. Wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, obviously, ICBA supported Site C. It's 5,000 construction jobs, and we're a construction association, so you want to see those continue. I have questions about some of the decisions that were made along the way. Obviously, some of the engineering decisions, we're not engineers. You and I certainly cannot speak to fissures or cracks or things in the bedrock and issues like that. So you got to trust the experts. Trust the science, as we've been raised to believe here these past few years. So obviously, there's some issues there. I read Rob's piece on this. One little quibble that I might pass along to Rob is that he mentioned that the NDP would be supportive of it because it's a signal to their blue-collar union base that they're still pro-resources. Most of the unionized workers that are at Site C are not the kind of unionized workers that the BC NDP like. They're from a progressive union called CHEK. They're not from their traditional building trades unions that funnel many hours, candidates, and a lot of money into the NDP coffers. So that was always a little bit of a tension there is, they're unionized workers, but they're not NDP kind of unionized workers. So it's interesting to see this project unfold. Listen, it's a long way away from the decision makers in Victoria. I think Michelle Mungal, as Minister of Energy, may have seen it twice in her time, 3 years as the Minister of Energy. I'm not sure John Horgan has seen it more than once, since he famously bought the stake saying no to Site C and drove it into the ground to raise money for the First Nations there, the Indigenous bands there. But and again, the standing offer is here at ICBA. Whoever has that stake, I'm willing to pay money for that stake, and the John Horgan one. But nonetheless, it's a long way from Victoria. We find this issue with the Taylor Bridge, which is another important transportation project in that area. Goes over the Peace River and really connects the North and South Peace. You've ever wondered where the line is between the North and South Peace? It's the Taylor Bridge over the Peace River. And it desperately needs refurbishment. It's a 60-year-old bridge that was actually used elsewhere before that and reconfigured into the current situation. Massive energy use of oil and gas trucks going over it, plus regular folks using it. And it's hard to get it on Victoria's agenda, on the provincial government's agenda. Not just for this government, for any government, because it's so far, it's literally the opposite side of the province. And so, Site C is a little bit of out of sight, out of mind for a lot of British Columbians, although as the bills come due, you wonder, will that change?
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. It's when you go up to a place like Dawson Creek or Fort St. John, you're reminded just how big BC is. You can fly to Calgary from Vancouver in an hour and 10 minutes, and it's substantially longer to fly up to Dawson or Fort St. John. And so you're right. It's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. And, it's a region that's not really politically in question. Yeah. So, it may get it sometimes has trouble running its issues up the flagpole here in Victoria.
Yeah, exactly. And the Minister of Transportation now is Rob Fleming. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it's Rob Fleming. Obviously Victoria Swan Lake, the prettiest named of the ridings in British Columbia, I would say.
Oh, well, that and Vancouver Mount Pleasant, I think, would be the sort of the neck and neck there.
I've been to Mount Pleasant. It's neither a mountain nor terribly pleasant. So
we're speaking only of names, but yes.
Yes, but I assume there is a Swan Lake and that there are ballerinas dancing on the shores every day. But nonetheless, that's a long way. That is a long way from FSJ and the issues happening there. So, it's tough. There's, a lot of people talk about the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, we've put $4 billion into it, so, you need to put another 4 or 8 or whatever into it. It's easy in theory to talk about that, stopping those losses. It's very hard to do in real life. Yeah. And, now you're talking about a project that you've probably spent $5 or $6 billion on. You need the energy. Like, we can't electrify cars, the entire, automobile industry. We can't electrify it without Site Cs and probably more of them coming on stream. It's necessary. And, this is why, going back to, W.A.C. Bennett, this is why he gets so much credit for being the visionary that he was. He just did it. We call it Site C because it's actually the third dam on that river, right? The other two were greenlit by his government at a time where BC was tiny, but it's created this, very environmentally friendly hydroelectricity that we've come to rely on to power not just homes, but businesses, industries. It's another reason why you should tip your cap to Wacky Bennett.
Yeah, and I mean, whether you oppose or support Site C, it's emissions-free power. I've seen some tortured arguments against Site C saying it's actually dirtier. I've seen a few posts from people that don't need mentioning here, but saying it's actually dirtier than coal. That is ridiculous. That argument doesn't even really bear defending here. It's just, you can be opposed to Site C, that's fine, but I mean, not for that reason. That reason is, I'm trying to think of a different word than wrong.
Yeah. Well, coal, you're not blowing the top of mountains off in order to get coal, right? Obviously, it's much cleaner than that.
Yeah.
It's longer term because it is the ultimate renewable resource in British Columbia is water, rain. We've always got more of that. That's a silly argument. I also had someone once tell me, no, you don't understand. It's a microclimate there. They could grow tropical, fruit there. And I'm like, guys, it's Fort St. John. There ain't nothing tropical about it. No offense. You may have a little microclimate there, but even then you're extending a growing season to 3 or maybe 3 months, maybe 4 months. It's not a prime agricultural. It's not the Okanagan vineyards. It's not the Fraser Valley. It's not all that beautiful farmland on the way to the ferry from Victoria. This is pretty clearly. This is a good communal use for that land. Now the question is, can you do it affordably?
Another issue that has been bubbling in the background for a while, and we've talked about it a little on this show before, and that's the money laundering inquiry. And basically, I think we were kind of in the same place on it, where we were both a little mystified in that if you follow different reporters who are reporting on the same inquiry, it's hard to know what's actually going on there, because they seem to be watching two completely different affairs. This morning, I believe it was this morning, Ian Mulgrew from the Vancouver Sun wrote a really damning piece, actually, saying that, look, the numbers and the evidence that have been throwing around and the accusations that have been thrown around in money laundering just don't bear up to the actual numbers and the scrutiny. Other reporters have a very different take. But I'll tell you what, I read Mulgrew's piece this morning, and I'm still kind of we're going to have to wait and see what the final results are.
Yeah, it feels like one of those internet memes, like everything you've been told about X is wrong. Mulgrew is really swimming upstream against what has been very much the media consensus on this, driven by people like Sam Cooper and Kathy Tomlinson and a lot of the work that the Globe and Mail and Global TV and But I mean, Cooper made his bones writing about this for the Vancouver Sun and Province. And you have Ian Mulgrew, columnist for the Sun and Province, kind of indirectly calling into question a lot of that coverage. Reading Mulgrew's piece today, like if you read between the lines, like he kind of seems like he thinks the bigger problem was David Eby sensationalizing this stuff than what was actually being done in the casinos. I think they agree on one thing. The police dropped the ball. Gaming enforcement, police, RCMP, FinTrack, the federal government especially, dropped the ball. And that there was some more investigations that should have been done, could have been done, but weren't. But where Mulgrew is going is like, no, casinos, there was some money flowing into it, but it wasn't about laundering that money. It was about people with reckless lifestyles and deep pockets wanting to gamble, right? Like it wasn't so much a plan to kind of clean money. It was a plan to lose money because they had lots of this money sloshing around. He talks about underground banks being, sort of the more difficult problem. Like it is so different from what you read from the Masons, Sam Coopers of the world. Like I don't even know. I just wonder what commission Cullen is seeing. Is Cullen seeing this one that Mulgrew is reporting, or is he seeing the Sam Cooper one we've been, told or led to believe over the past few years?
I mean, and for people like you and me who are only following this through media reports, I can't say. I have no idea. I mean, we could only just sort of guessing. I think you've summed it up well. I mean, you kind of have to take the reports coming out from both sides, and they're not sides, but that's kind of what it appears like sometimes, and try and sort of divine common threads, because it's baffling to try and read one or the other and say, well, this is absolutely what's happening, and this is absolutely what the problem is in BC, because they just simply don't agree.
Yeah, and Mulgrew does not put a lot of stock in the Peter German report. And in fact, very clearly points out that Peter German was one of the RCMP officers in charge of investigating, or should have been in charge of investigating the stuff, and then gets commissioned by Eby to write a report. He downplays a lot of the findings of the report. For example, Peter German found that there were 1,173 suspicious cash transactions reported by casinos totaling $88.7 million. Now, not all of those were actually illegal, but let's say they all were. $88.7 million sounds like a lot. But then he points out, well, there was $6 billion a year going through casinos. Yeah. So, to put it into perspective, 88.7 million seconds is less than 3 years, whereas 6 billion seconds is almost 2 centuries. So it's a tiny amount of money, overall. It's really interesting. Like the commission heard German's dirty money report was flawed, more politics than disinterested examination. Like that's a pretty damning criticism. I just what happened here? Like let's say Mulgrew's right. Let's say Mulgrew's interpretation of what's going on there is, is correct. And okay, FinTrack and the federal government were problems. Always more could be done by government, but it really is not the widespread problem in the casinos as everyone said it was. This would really be damaging to EB then if that is actually the case. Attorney General getting way out over his skis, making what turns out to be very wild claims about what was going on in BC casinos, and all for political gain. If the Mulgrew version is correct, this may actually end up being more damaging to the NDP than to the BC Liberals that the commission was sort of set up to get.
Well, we're not going to know until Commissioner Cullen comes down on one side or the other, or in very Canadian fashion, somewhere in the middle. So we'll be talking about this many more times in the weeks to come, I'm sure.
Do you want to hear from China? At the bottom, they have this. He has this note that the Chinese government wants to fight financial crimes, including money laundering, and is willing to testify. Do you want to hear from China at this thing? Wouldn't that be fascinating? I mean, I don't know.
It would be fascinating. I mean, you'd have to sort of know going in advance. You'd have to bring in several shakers of salt. but I mean, it would be interesting, I think, if nothing else.
It's something. I don't know. It's just, I am so puzzled by this whole thing because the Mulgrew reporting is so different from what we've seen elsewhere. So
diametrically opposed. It's fascinating watching the two narratives side by side because, as I say, they simply don't agree, and it is as if they're reporting on two different inquiries. I struggle to think of another example in BC politics like this, and I simply can't think of one. And I'm talking about coming from reporters, not from political parties.
Yeah. No, exactly. Now, casinos are just one part of this whole thing.
Sure.
They also want to look into the housing market. It was some weird things. Luxury automobiles, I think, was on the list. Different opportunities to, I guess, launder money, the drug trade as well, I suppose. But, casinos really were the key part of the allegations. The hockey bag full of money we saw in that one video, which apparently came from the casinos because the casinos wanted to put pressure on the federal government to investigate more. So,
I think you're hearing smoke alarm testing. Let's hope it's testing.
Yes. All right, there you go. So hopefully Maclean is okay. It has stopped.
That's not the first time that's happened when I'm doing one of these shows either. Once was on a live CKNW hit too, where the host kept asking me if I was okay. And,
Are you okay?
Thank you for their concern. Yes, thank you.
Maclean, it's a pandemic. Talk to me.
Condo
real
living,
talk.
man.
Are you
These
okay?
things happen.
Are you okay? Anyways, the Mulgrew-Cooper dichotomy just it just continues to, the chasm between the two reporting it just continues to grow, and
all we can do is watch going forward. That's kind of all we can do. I get asked a few times, and what do you think about this? And I say, I don't know what to think about it because I see two completely different, I don't want to call them narratives because that makes it sound like there's an agenda at play, but two completely different takes on what's happening.
I went and poked around on the Cullen Commission website today because of the coverage of this to see if you can make head or tails of it. But you have hours and hours, hundreds of hours of testimony that you don't want to watch and go through. There's something like 550 exhibits listed, everything from affidavits to emails to giant reports, all in PDF form. And you're like, well, that's great, but it's such an overwhelming amount of information now that I guess we just have to wait until the report comes out, which was supposed to be out in May, but obviously is going to get kicked down the road.
Speaking of things that are getting kicked down the road, today in better years, I would probably see you today because you would probably be here in Victoria for budget lockup because today would be, well, I've just given it away, Provincial Budget Day. That's obviously not happening. Or wait, is it Throne Speech today? Or no, it would be Throne Speech today and budget next week. Whatever. The point is these things are not...
No, I think you're wrong. I think it was Throne Speech last week and budget today.
Oh, you're right.
Because I always had to leave. I always had to leave on Family Day to catch a ferry.
Yeah, you go. You're absolutely right. So today would be budget day. I got ahead of myself, and well, that's not happening. We're not going to get a budget until April, and of course, we're not getting the legislative session until the first week of March. I think it is just March 1st. I mean, I don't really have much to add there, other than the fact that today ordinarily would be an extremely busy day in BC politics, arguably the busiest, and yet. No, it's just not.
Yeah. This budget, when it finally does come, which I think is April 20th, is when it's signed. So
it's 4/20.
2 months, yeah, 420, that's right. Write yourself jokes. What, was April Fool's Day not available, Finance Minister? You had to go with 420, but okay. There's some bureaucrat with a big smile on his face for getting that through. Anyways.
Someone's enjoying it very much, yes.
Yeah, nonetheless, it won't just be Vancouver residents sky high on 420. It'll be the deficit and the debt and all sorts of interesting little things. I have no idea what this budget's going to land. You know, they've been doing quarterly reports, but they've all been late. We haven't been getting great reporting out of the Crowns as far as how they're doing. Obviously, the Lottery Corp is cratered when it comes to revenue. No casinos, corrupt or otherwise, being allowed to run in British Columbia. So, you know, revenues are going to be way down. Ironically, the housing market will help stem that tide a bit. The much loathed housing market that the NDP love to kick the snot out of continues on. But today would have been fascinating because we'd start to see some of these bills come home to roost. But 2 months from now, I guess, like, you're only putting off the inevitable. You're going to have a budget sooner or later. You're going to have to report this stuff out.
Well, and it's funny. I was going back and reading some of the coverage from last year, and it was, you know, it was a balanced budget, but the numbers had been trending down. And I'm talking about the surplus had been trending down for a few years. And one of the things that we talked about last year was, you know, if things keep going in this direction, then this year, 2021 might be in the red. It's definitely going to be in the red, and obviously, I think there's obviously an appetite for that now. Things have changed completely on their head since last budget, which was just weeks before everything got locked down for the pandemic. So you're right. I mean, eventually a budget's going to have to come, and it's not like people are expecting a surplus. That's not to say that the numbers couldn't be better or worse, but you know, the stuff we talked about last year is kind of out the window.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know, the only recurring storylines from last year that might be relevant to this year might be ICBC. You know, they're giving back a bunch of the money in rebates. Obviously, they were on much solider financial footing simply because COVID reduced claims by such a, you know, unbelievable amount. So, you know, that will be the kind of recurring theme from last year. But you're right, the rest will be, it's a completely different budget, completely different fiscal era. You know, all those years of grinding out, you know, paying down the operating debt to the point where it was gone. No longer borrowing to pay for the groceries, as Mike DeYoung would lecture me constantly. You know, those days are long gone now. And, you know, this budget, probably the next one, will be the two worst of our generation, maybe in BC history. And then you got to start figuring out, like, how are you going to dig yourself out of this hole?
Yeah.
And the answer isn't going to be more taxes. There's going to be some spending controls that are needed. But the answer will be finding ways to supercharge the economic recovery, getting businesses back up and running and hiring, getting sales flowing through so you build up your sales tax, getting housing and construction going as much as possible, like getting tourism back. That will be the way to supercharge it. The question is, do the NDP have the expertise and experience to actually make those decisions, buck their usual you know, tax and spend nature, and, you know, create the conditions necessary for private enterprise to pick up this ball and run with it.
It will be fascinating to watch those internal debates play out on the NDP side, as you say, in about 2 years, when there will be some tension between those who just, well, let's just tax people more, and that, you know, that's how we're going to get more revenue, and those who say, as you just did, that, you know, the only way to create more revenue is to get the economy going again, because right now it's in the tank. And these will be intense internal debates that we'll hear secondhand, but it will be fascinating over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and before we move off of that, you know, over the weekend, one of the NDP MLAs, I believe it was Katrina Chen, but I'm not positive on that. I should double check, but tweeted out, you know, marching, you know, I'm walking against TMX in my neighborhood, you know, and still, you know, flogging the dead horse that is the TMX Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline, something that courts have upheld, you know. Every process is upheld. The federal government is, you know, put through the ringer and come out the other side on. Everyone else in Canada is, you know, accepting that this is going on, except for this tiny group of activists, and apparently, you know, including at least one NDP MLA. Those are exactly the kind of projects we need more of. We need more of these energy projects. Like, if you could ever find a way to land a second LNG Canada, now is the time, right? Like, we need that infrastructure and that investment in British Columbia to get us out of this economic hole. You're not going to get out of to debt. You're not going to be able to provide the same level of services to people if you don't have economic growth, money flowing into the coffers. So less of the old fights against TMX that you've already lost, and more of the bright, forward thinking. What can we do to make the economy run better?
No, I mean, if you follow people like Jock Finlayson and Ken Peacock over at the Business Council of BC, they've been pretty clear, and by they I mean the numbers and that they're presenting for the last few months, is that it's the big mega projects that have been keeping BC, in the relatively good position it is vis-a-vis the other Canadian provinces, and not anything else. And then where the job losses have been overwhelmingly in urban BC. And so if it wasn't for the LNG Canadas and yes, the Trans Mountain and Site C, that BC would be in a substantially worse position right now than it is.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I would hope that, I do know the Business Council of British Columbia briefed NDP caucus on economic issues. I'm hopeful that they heard with open ears and open hearts the message about economic prosperity and how important it is to getting the economy going, getting the services you need and value funded. So, but then again, I see NDP MLAs marching against TMX and kind of shake my head at, that feels like such a 2-year ago fight.
Speaking of 2 years ago fight, maybe it was just a year ago we had a federal election. It feels like much longer. I guess it was 2 years ago now that we're 2021. Federal election rumors and vaccination plans are kind of become the same issue because there are persistent rumors that the federal Liberals are kind of making the same calculation that John Horgan did, looking at a minority government and thinking a majority is within striking distance. The problem is that the vaccination rollout has been, it's been glacial for reasons that have been well canvassed. They're now saying that a story that you actually brought to my attention this morning, the pace that would be needed to meet the goal of having every Canadian who wants a vaccination vaccinated by September is something on the order of, 2 million a week?
Yes.
So, I mean, wow.
Every week.
Every week, yes.
So for 26 weeks, from April 1st to September 30th. So remember, Trudeau's goal is every Canadian who wants a vaccine will have it by September. Okay, so we give them right to September 30th. April 1st to September 30th, you would have to be vaccinating 2 million Canadians every single week. And I just don't see it. There was a stat, I think on Friday, the Americans vaccinated more people in one day than Canada has done up to this point. We're falling further and further behind. Yes, eventually the other places will get vaccinated. I guess the doses will arrive. But, do you trust 10 provinces and 3 territories to be able to get 2 million doses into arms? A week, every single week? It's kind of mind-boggling to me that they think they can still do this. But, you read some of the tweets from some of their key people, the Jerry Buttses of the world. And it's very clear, while they think this is not a big deal, by the time the vaccine starts rolling in March and April, everyone will have forgotten that they were ever waiting and everything's going to be hunky-dory. I'm the opposite, Maclean. I think a few things. Number one, I think the schism between us and the Americans is going to continue to grow. I think the Americans are going to hit herd immunity a lot faster than we are, not just because of vaccinations, because so many of them had it. So, that's 2 ways of getting herd immunity. I think
Grim, but yes.
I think that, whatever team in the NHL makes it out of the Canadian division to the semifinals for the Stanley Cup will be at a disadvantage, because I believe that every American team will be vaccinated by then, and the Canadian team still will not. Because I think, if I'm doing the math correctly, I think it'll trickle down by then to those teams. I think we're going to be reminded of this constantly. I think the Americans, it's going to turn on us where the Americans aren't going to want to open the land border with Canada because none of us have been vaccinated, or too few of us have been vaccinated. All of a sudden, this is going to turn, right? It's going to turn on a dime, and we're going to be going, hold on. The Americans, for all of their flaws in their healthcare system, they spend trillions of dollars on healthcare in that country. This is what they were built for. If there's one thing that they're ready to do, it's this, because they have so much scatter. Whereas, Canada, we're not really built for this kind of overwhelming, amount of interactions with the public. Now, some provinces will do it better than others. I suspect BC will be on the better side of that. Some communities will do it better than others. Some health regions will do it better. But at the same time, if you're Trudeau, you're putting a lot of faith in the Doug Fords, Brian Palisters, John Horgans of the world to roll out a vaccination plan that works, and you're kind of hanging your electoral chances on their ability to get actual doses into arms when the vaccine arrives.
Well, I mean, and you're talking about logistics, which is, I mean, all of your points are valid. I don't mean to undermine them. But the supply is a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're also sort of operating on the assumption that the last promises, those were gone in the past, but the new ones, the new targets, the new reassurances they're getting from various companies, those are good. You can take those to the bank. I mean, you're talking about a leap of faith at this point. I mean, because the first ones didn't work out. So, I mean, I hope they're right. I hope Gerald Butts is right when he says, and I saw that tweet too, saying that this will all seem like a strange partisan memory in a couple months. I hope he's right. I don't think he is, because as I saw a number of people, and I'm not talking about partisans, I'm talking about, the Shatchy Curls of the world saying, like, listen, I'm sorry. I know that you view everything through a partisan lens, but me not being able to see my parents is simply not going to seem like, a partisan trifle in 2 months. It's just not. And so even if it's not your fault, if the European Union confiscates every single vaccine made within its borders until every one of their citizens is vaccinated, that's not something Canada can do anything about. That said, it's still going to cause a delay on this end, and people are going to blame the federal government. So I don't think it's partisan to worry and wonder, and especially since we've already been burned.
Yeah, and then what happens if there's the third wave with all these variants?
Yeah.
And some people say it could be, in sheer numbers, worse than the first two waves, although maybe not quite as deadly, because hopefully some of the long-term care folks have been properly vaccinated, assuming the vaccines hold up against the variants, which is a big if. But if you're Trudeau, you got to be doing the calculation, right? Like, my question to Justin Trudeau would be this, and it was my question to John Horgan back in the day. What are you not accomplishing now that you think you would with a majority government? Like, what has the NDP, Bloc, Greens, and Conservatives, what have they united to stop you from doing that you'll be able to do with a majority? Because I don't see any bill that's gone down to defeat. I don't see any policy that you've punted on. I don't see any principle or ideology or something important that you've had to sacrifice in order to hold the House of Commons together. So if you're not going to gain anything except power, then you circle back to, like, it's selfish. You're putting people at risk for your own electoral gains. You're putting your job ahead of everyone else's. All those things that we beat the snot out of John Horgan over during the campaign, that will now transfer over onto Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Why unnecessarily put Canadians at risk? What is the thing you need so badly besides power?
And you brought up the BC election, and Elections BC did a tremendous job making sure that the vote could be held safely. So putting aside the justification for the election for a moment, but I mean that was months ago. And if you've been over the weekend, there's an election happening right now in Newfoundland where they basically had to suspend it in parts of the province because it's not safe to vote. And so I believe it's basically everything in St. John's they're putting on hold. The rest of the election is going on elsewhere. This is bizarre. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they're doing it for reasons other than an abundance of caution, which is a good thing. But I mean, if that's happening right now in a Canadian province, that doesn't suggest that it's going to be safe to go ahead and hold a general election across the country, especially in places that have had it a lot worse than Newfoundland. It just the risk is great. And we got lucky here in BC, arguably a combination of luck and some good plans on the part of Elections BC. But man, if there's nothing to suggest that Elections Newfoundland is no less professional, and that what happened there couldn't happen across the country.
Yeah, and again, I come back to this idea of social license, right? By holding an election, as leaders, you're saying to the people, relax a bit. We can do this. We can do it safely. And what you're really saying to people are, like, you're smart people, calculate your own risk and figure it out yourself. Now, the truth is, Maclean, the vast majority of British Columbians are doing that. We're all taking a little more risk than maybe we have before. We're calculating whether, we're doing it smart and safely, but you're calculating all the time, right? Like, can I bring this, should I expand the bubble by, 1 or 2 for the kids in order to, like, all of this is happening kind of under the current. No one posts about it on social media because they don't want the grief. No one talks about it in public, but it's happening. And, a federal election, though, would take that to a further thing, because it triggers in people like, well, this guy's been telling me to stay home, who barely has left Rideau Cottage, now it's fine to have an election. So I guess like it just causes a relaxation. We saw it in British Columbia. As much as the NDP bristle at the idea that COVID cases went up because of the election, COVID cases went up because of the social license offered by the election, right? Like we relaxed and we got bit. And that's something that Trudeau has got to think about. I just find it so selfish of these politicians to put their own power agenda. Yeah. It's not even an agenda. They want power. They want unlimited power. So they're willing to thrust Canadians into unnecessary elections for no other reason than to cement their job for another year.
And you're right. It's not as though, we're Italy and we can't pass a budget. I mean, it's the prime minister is relatively unimpeded right now. And so it would be a pretty naked and transparent grab for a majority government. But I mean, this argument was had here in BC last year where the NDP gave reasons why they couldn't work with the Greens anymore. But I mean, they couldn't ever point to anything of substance on that score. And so I fear it'll be something very similar in Ottawa.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm not looking forward to it. My daughter is hopeful that it does occur after May 12th because she turns 18 May 12th. So she, if you're going to have a vote, let's do it after May 12th. But as much as I love her, she'll have plenty of elections to vote in. Let's not do one during a pandemic if we can avoid it.
Well, and if it's going to happen this year, it'll happen in the summer when respiratory diseases are it's not respiratory disease season, and hopefully they'll be making some progress on vaccinations by then. Calling an election today, now in February, when most of Canada is freezing and the vaccinations are going nowhere, would be suicidal, both politically and probably health wise. And so she's got a good chance of it happening after May 12th if it's going to happen this year.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Maclean, I got one other thing to ask you about.
Yep.
I understand now you're a real TV star.
Yes. We launched a new show with Rob Shaw at CHEK News with myself, Katy Merrifield, who is a BC Liberal strategist, and Jillian Oliver, who's a Green strategist. Show's called Political Capital. I'm hoping to get it up on the Orca soon. If not there, you can also get it anywhere you get podcasts, including a video version at CHEK News site. It's a cool show. If you're watching this show, you know who I am, and you probably know who Rob Shaw is. Katy Merrifield and Jillian Oliver are the two strategists who were behind the last two successful leadership campaigns, respectively, in BC. Jillian Oliver with Sonia Furstenau and the BC Greens, and Katy Merrifield with Andrew Wilkinson and the BC Liberals. And so, I mean, they're the real deal. And so getting the four of us together to talk about politics is we've only done one show. I thought it was really interesting, and I hope everyone else does too.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I will admit I did not watch it on the weekend, but I'm looking forward to actually, I'll be a podcast guy, I think. I'll download it. I'm hopeful that you and Rob know that just to shut up and let the two brilliant strategists talk, because...
Very much so.
Excellent. And, it is interesting. By the way, the leadership race before those two was the NDP one, and there wasn't one. John Horgan just was given the...
That's true.
Because no one else wanted it.
Something of a coronation, and yes. Which happens sometimes.
Yes. So anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing it, and congratulations to you and to Rob. And it's cool to see our little orca fish swimming on the TV.
Well, this little orca fish is happy to keep swimming. And after that, I mean, as I say, normally in a better week, we'd be in person today, but that'll have to wait with everything else. Until then, on behalf of Jordan Bateman, myself, and all of your little fish here at the Orca, happy politics.